Imagine we were asked to make a program used by teachers, and all it's going to do is take in from the teacher input grades for a student. So it's going to take as many grades as the teacher wants for a student, and then it's going to print out all those grades that the teacher just inputted, and then the program finally is going to write what the average of all of these grades is. So for this, we're definitely going to need a scanner, and we'll definitely need to be getting from the teacher what the grades are, how many grades there are, so that we can print out what the grades were, and we can also print out what the average is. So the very first thing I'm going to do is bring in the scanner class in order for us to use it, because the scanner is going to be what's going to allow us to get stuff from the teacher. So we passed in system.in and I called my scanner scan. So the very first thing I'm going to do is ask the teacher what or how many grades the student has. So let's say, how many total grades does the student have? And then we're going to go ahead and say int number of grades is scan.nextInt. So this is going to get whatever the teacher types in next, and that's going to be saved into this number of grades. So we can use this to make our array. So we're going to have a double array of grades, and the size of this array is going to be the number of grades, because that's how many grades we're going to have. So we need an array with that many slots. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go through every single slot and put in a number into it. So we're going to do from 0 to the number of grades, or one less than that, because remember we index from 0 and on, and we're going to go ahead and put in a value that the teacher is going to pass in. So what we'll need here is a loop that does I is less than number of grades, I plus plus, and we're going to go ahead and ask the teacher for a grade. So I'm going to go ahead and print something out here so that the teacher knows that it's being asked. So input student's grade here, and then we're going to actually get that grade. So we're going to say scan.nextDouble. That's the code that's going to actually get the grade from the teacher. And then if we put grades I here, we're going to actually put this grade into grades I slot. So for example, if the teacher says there are 5 grades, then we know our array will have 5 slots, but they're indexed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first time we do the loop, I is 0. So we're going to say grades at 0 is whatever the teacher types in. So we're going to put that value in 0. Then we increment I, we do it again. We say input the student's grade. So now we're at grades 1, and we're going to get the next thing from the teacher, and we're going to put in 1. And we're going to do this all the way till we get to 4. After we do grades 4 and we put the double in here, we're going to increment I becomes 5, but 5 is not less than this 5. So we won't go into grades 5, which is perfect because there is no 5 slot since we start indexing at 0. So this is going to go ahead and loop exactly whatever the number of grades times it is. So in that example, it would have been 5, but the teacher can really put in any number here, and it'll keep asking the teacher for grades until that number of grades is done and completed and we've filled out our array. Now the reason we're filling out this array is so that we can have all these values, all these grades stored somewhere, so that we can traverse through the array, print out all the grades like how our program was originally designed to do, and then we can also go through all of these grades, add them all up so that we can divide. So the reason we store numbers is so that we can use them again later in our program in order to print out averages, or just print out what it was, or just use it for some other reason. So right now, this is just taking care of the part where we're actually putting the grades into the array. Now we just need another loop that goes ahead and traverses through the array and prints out the values of all of the grades in that array. So I'm going to go ahead and have another for loop that's just going to print out every value here. So we're going to say grades I, and then we're just going to add a comma here so that there's a comma in between every grade. And I'm not going to have an ln here so that all the grades are in one line. So I'm going to do grade 0 and then plus comma and a space. So let's go ahead and run this and see what's going on so far. So let's say there are 4 grades in total. So let's say the first grade is 100, the second grade is a 20. So at this point, we're in this second for loop here. Sorry, this first for loop here. Then we're going to have a 60. So this is the first for loop here. So this happens 4 times. So first we typed in 4. So we did I is less than 4. So we went ahead and did 0, 1, 2, 3. So that actually happens 4 times. That's why we got asked 4 times what all the grades are. And then we went ahead and we printed every single one of these grades. Now it's a little weird to have this comma at the end. So what we want to do is, if we are at the last iteration of the loop, then that means we're at the last number. We're printing out the last number. And if we're at the last number, we don't want a comma. So what we could do is we could say only print a comma if we're not at the last one. If we're in any of these, it's okay to put a comma, but if we're in the last one, let's not put that comma. So what we could do is erase this from here, and we can say if we're not in the last one, so we know that the last one, the last iteration of this loop is going to be when I is number of grades minus 1, because we know we never get to number of grades because it can't be that if I is number of grades is less than number of grades. That can't happen. So we know the biggest number that I is going to be is number of grades minus 1. So the biggest time that I is at the very end, then we will know it's this last number. So we're going to go ahead and say if I is not the last number, so if I is not number of grades minus 1, which is the last number, then we'll go ahead and print out that comma. So this is going to take care of that comma issue we were seeing. So let's go ahead and run this again so that you can see that we remove the comma from the last one. So let's say there's 3 numbers, let's say 50, 30, and 40. Then we see we have the commas for the first 2 and not for the last one. Now the last thing this program was supposed to do was print out the average of all these numbers. So what we want to do here is, when we're traversing through all of these numbers, which we're already doing in this for loop, we want to keep accumulating what the sum is so far. So when we see 50, we want the sum to be 50. When we see 30, we want to add that 30 to the 50. When we see 40, we want to add this 40 to the 30 and the 50. So what we're going to do is, what's usually done is we just have a variable on the outside. Let's make it a double, and we call it sum. And then all we have to do is, every time we traverse through the array, every time we reach an element, we're going to add that element to our sum, and then we're going to do it over and over again so that the sum keeps getting bigger and bigger until we have the total sum of our array. And then at the very end, all we have to do is divide this sum by the number of elements of our array, and then once we do that, we know that that is just the average. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say sum is going to be whatever the sum was. So we're going to keep accumulating that sum plus whatever element of the array we're at currently. So grades at I. So all this is going to do is, at the beginning, sum is 0. So we're going to say 0 plus grades at 0. So we know 50 is our first one. If we were in this scenario and the teacher typed in these 3 numbers, we would have 50 here. So we'd say 0 plus 50 is 50. And then we'd put that 50 back into sum. Then we'd keep going with the code, and then I would increment to 1. So now we go back up this loop, I is 1. We go in here and we say sum equals sum. So currently sum is 50, and we're going to add grades at 1. So grades at 1 is 30. So now we're going to put in 80 into sum. We do the loop again. Now I is 2. So now we say 80 plus grades at 2, which is 40. So we're going to add 40 plus 80, and then that gives us our total sum. We're done with the loop because 3 is not less than number of grades. Because number of grades in this scenario was 3, that's why we have 50, 40, 30. Those are 3 numbers. So at this point, we have the sum of our entire array. So now all we have to do is print out what the average is. So the average is just going to be, let's type in average here. The average is just going to be whatever the sum is divided by the number of grades. Now remember, instead of using number of grades, it would have been totally fine to use grades.length as well, because we know that this is the same number. So let's do grades.length, because we put in number of grades as the length of our grades array anyway, so we know those values will be the same. And let's go ahead and add a new line character, because if not, we're going to be on the same line here and it's going to look weird saying average here on the same line. So I'm just going to put in that special new line character here so that it goes to the next line. I'm going to go ahead and run this. So let's say there's 3 grades. Let's do some easy numbers. So let's say there's 100, 90, and 95. We know this will give us an average of 95. So let's see if our program works. And there it is. We have our 95 as our average, and we printed out 100, 90, and 95. Now there's a weird space here. All we have to do is erase it here, maybe capitalize the A, and then we are good to go. Let's try a few more numbers and make sure that our program is running smoothly. So what we could do is say there's 6 numbers this time. Let's say there's a 30, 20, say 55.6, 29, 59, and there you have it. We have our average, we have our numbers, there's no comma here. So this is a good example of how we can use loops and if statements to traverse through our arrays